This short video is to introduce and explain the independent reading choices for the 2022 English Grade 10 and 11 classes at St. Patrick's CBC in Kimberley, South Africa. As an IEB school, we have to implement a reading strategy to meet the requirements of the English Home Language curriculum. The IEB expects every pupil to have read 7 additional books by the middle of their matric year. By additional books, I mean approved books which have not been studied in literature classes. In Grade 10 and Grade 11, we assist our pupils by giving them a guided independent reading task. This leaves pupils with their own task of finding an additional 5 books to read independently. In 2022, the focus is on memoirs. You will get to choose one of 4 memoirs, all written by South African or African authors. In terms 1 and 2 next year, you will spend some lesson time reading your chosen book and exploring this particular style of writing. In order for you to get the most out of this assessment, and it is a big one, you need to make an informed choice. So let's get started as I give you a brief summary of each of the memoirs. As I said, for 2022, you must choose one of the 4 memoirs for the IR task. The first is Get Me to 21, the JENNA LOWE story. The second is 6 Years with Al-Qaeda, the Stephen McGann story. The third is Born a Crime and Other Stories by Trevor. And the fourth one is One of Them, an Eton College memoir by Musa, Okwonga. The first 3 are written by South Africans and the fourth is by a Ugandan author. In the next slides, I'll give you a brief overview of each of these memoirs, taken from the publisher's promotional material. After an extraordinary 4-year battle, Gabby Lowe lost her beautiful, talented 20-year-old daughter, JENNA LOWE, in 2015 to pulmonary arterial hypertension, a rare degenerative lung disease following a double lung transplant. JENNA was young, bright, and articulate. She was Lead South Africa's Youth Hero of the Year in 2015. Her death was mourned by thousands of people whose lives she had touched. And during her short but full life, JENNA and the Lowe family raised much needed awareness around this rare and devastating disease, highlighting the dire need for access to medication and organ donors locally. And although desperately ill, JENNA became the face for organ donation in South Africa through the hugely successful #GetMeTo21 campaign, in which she invited all South Africans to attend her 21st birthday celebration by clicking on a link to become an organ donor. Tragically, JENNA died 4 months before reaching her milestone. Brilliantly written, riveting in all its terrible truth and pain, in this brutally honest memoir, Gabby Lowe shares her family's desperate fight to save JENNA's life. Get Me to 21 will inspire us to believe that the ability to face even the darkest and most unimaginable lives deep within us all. While riding his motorbike through Mali on his way home from London to Johannesburg, Steve McGann was taken captive in Timbuktu by Al-Qaeda. Life as he knew it changed in that instant. Driven deep into the desert with 2 other prisoners, Steve was now a valuable pawn in Al-Qaeda's geopolitical operations. With nothing to bargain with and everything to lose, for the next 6 years Steve became reluctantly engaged in what he refers to as the greatest chess game of my life. Thousands of kilometers away in Johannesburg, the shock of his kidnapping hit his wife Kath and the rest of the McGann family. working every option they could find, from established diplomatic protocols to the murky back channels of the kidnap game. They set to work on trying to free Steve. As the months turned into years, Steve had to adapt, or depression and despair would overwhelm him. With no control over his future and no end to his open-air incarceration in sight, he knew that he would have to go to extraordinary lengths to survive both his prison and his prisoners. His sole focus was to make it back home to his wife and family. So to raise his status among Al-Qaeda and improve his quality of life in the desert sands, and to give himself some form of structure and hope, Steve converted to Islam and accepted a new name, Lot. Teaching himself French and Arabic, as the years passed and the prisoners and their captors moved from camp to evade the Malian and French forces, Steve took it upon himself to get to know and understand Al-Qaeda. To this day, he holds the unenviable record of Al-Qaeda's longest-held prisoner, and while the captive-captor dynamic was always there, by virtue of the long years he spent with them, Steve got to see what no Westerner has ever seen before. He lived in their world and came to understand where they came from and what led them to jihad. He saw boys grow into men. He watched as mujahideen stuck up their hands for suicide missions and a ticket to heaven, and saw the organization's success strategies and weaknesses, their victories and their losses. 6 years with Al-Qaeda is not just an incredible story of mental strength, physical endurance, and the resilience of the human spirit, but also a unique, nuanced perspective on one of the world's most feared terrorist organizations. Not only did Steve McGahn survive his ordeal, but in many respects he came out of the desert both a changed man and a stronger, more positive human. You need to be aware that there are 2 versions of Born a Crime in print. You are not to purchase either of these 2 editions, as they are the kiddies versions. You must buy this edition of Trevor Noah's memoir. Trevor Noah's unlikely path from apartheid South Africa to the desk of The Daily Show began with a criminal act, his birth. Trevor was born to a white Swiss father and a black Xhosa mother at a time when such a union was punishable by 5 years in prison. Living proof of his parents' indiscretion, Trevor was kept mostly indoors for the earliest years of his life, bound by the extreme and often absurd measures his mother took to hide him from a government that could at any moment steal him away. Finally liberated by the end of South Africa's tyrannical white rule, Trevor and his mother set forth on a grand adventure, living openly and freely and embracing the opportunities won by a centuries-long struggle. Born a Crime is the story of a mischievous young boy who grows into a restless young man as he struggles to find himself in a world where he was never supposed to exist. It's also the story of that young man's relationship with his fearless, rebellious, and fervently religious mother, his teammate, a woman determined to save her son from the cycle of poverty, violence, and abuse that would ultimately threaten her own life. The stories collected here are by turns hilarious, dramatic, and deeply affecting. Whether subsisting on caterpillars for dinner during hard times, being thrown from a moving car during an attempted kidnapping, or just trying to survive the life and death pitfalls of dating in high school, Trevor illuminates his curious world with an incisive wit and unflinching honesty. His stories weave together to form a moving and searingly funny portrait of a boy making his way through a damaged world in a dangerous time, armed only with a keen sense of humor and a mother's unconventional, unconditional love. This is Musa Okwonga, a Ugandan writer, and his memoir is one of them. Okwonga was a young black man who grew up in a predominantly working-class town. He was not your typical Eton College student. Eton College, the posh school attended by Prince William and Prince Harry and Boris Johnson, the current Prime Minister of the UK. The experience molded Okwonga, challenged him, but also made him wonder why a place that was so good for him also seems to contribute to the harm being done to the United Kingdom. The more he searched, the more evident the connection became between one of Britain's most prestigious institutions and the genesis of Brexit, and between his hometown in the suburbs of Greater London and the rise of the far right. Woven throughout this deeply personal and unflinching memoir of Musa's 5 years at Eton in the 1990s is a present-day narrative which engages with much wider questions about pressing social and political issues, privilege, the distribution of wealth, the rise of the far right in the UK, systemic racism, the boys' club of government, and the power of the few to control the fate of the many. One of them is both an intimate account and a timely exploration of race and class in modern Britain. This memoir was published this year, so you might struggle to get hold of it in Kimberley. You will be asked to indicate your preference on an Edmodo poll. Grade 9s, the poll will be conducted by the teacher in charge of Grade 9 English, Miss Brown, and Grade 10s, I'll conduct the poll on your Edmodo English page. The poll is not binding, but it will give our bookshop staff an opportunity to estimate the popularity and number of the books that need to be sourced and ordered for you. Every year, the independent reading options are linked by a common theme. And for 2022, that theme will deal with perseverance and hope. You'll also be expected to study the specific writing style and techniques that are common to the writing of memoirs. In 2022, the independent reading will be assessed in 3 sections. You'll be divided into groups or literature circles, where you will have to complete the reading and understanding of your chosen memoir together. The written assessments, however, are completed individually. There are no group projects. You will have to read a prepared passage from your memoir of approximately 2 pages in length. You will also participate in various discussions related to these memoirs, for which you will receive a conversation mark. And finally, you will be examined on your reading in the mid-year and possibly the end-of-year exams in paper 2. This usually takes the format of a generic question related to the common theme or style of writing of these memoirs. Further details will be given to you in the exam information booklets that you receive before every formal exam period. In grade 12, you'll be assessed on all 7 books that you have read independently. This is moderated externally, usually by an official appointed by the IEB, who will either travel to Kimberley for this purpose or conduct an online interview with you. This assessment is for the final grade 12 oral mark and consists of a prepared reading passage, which you must choose from one of your 7 books, and a guided conversation. For the current grade 10s, this means that you could also be examined on the graphic novel that you selected as your 2021 independent reading choice. Every year there are matrics who are in a panic before the IEB oral moderation as they have not read the required 7 books. Do not be that person. Get your reading finished by the end of grade 11. I hope that this has given you enough information to make an informed choice for 2022. There's a fair bit of information available on the internet as well, so I suggest that you do some more research. And if you have any queries, please don't hesitate to contact me. And do remember to indicate your preference when the Edmodo poll is posted.